No good way to transition this there, but here's how we're going to connect the dots. The Charlotte Hornets. Charles Lee is an assistant on the Boston Celtics. He will
Very good.
soon take over as the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. And Wes, to me, he is actually how I think about the offseason for the Hornets. So we're going to preview their offseason here because he's a Bud disciple. He worked under Bud, I think, since 2014 until Bud is let go, and then he ends up on the Boston staff. So he goes from the motion-based offense of the Bucks and the Hawks and all of that to the Celtics and the Missoula and the threes and what they're doing here. And he's going to apply that to a very different circumstance that is headed by LaMelo Ball, that I think is a roster really lacking a lot of other else, that is drafted really woefully over the last several years, that is really lacking an identity, that is in need of something, but has LaMelo. And I consider myself a LaMelo skeptic. I'm really curious to see where he's going to go. His best season came with a coach that he butted heads with because he maybe coached him too hard, which is just like a weird thing. But what Charles Lee does and how they shape the roster around that identity to me is the most fascinating part of this offseason. And you could tell me they could do anything, and I would be like, sure, that seems like a reasonable plan. But I think this is going to take time. But I wonder how you balance it with having LaMelo on the contract he's on with, at least, are you a Mark Williams guy? What do you mean for your draft picks? Like, I think there are some interesting things here, but to me, it starts with the coach and it starts with the philosophy of how they're going to play basketball starting next season.
And Brandon Miller, too, who was great as a rookie.
Oh, yeah,
looks every bit of a franchise player. You're right to be a LaMelo skeptic. Number one, regardless of what you think about his style of play, his personality, any of this stuff, the guy played 22 games last year, 36 games the year before that. The guy can't get on the court, and he can't stay on it either. So that's the biggest problem with him. Fortunately, I think that there's if you're Charles Lee, what do you want to bring basically from your past experience, Milwaukee under Bud, with the Celtics this year? It's the importance of three-point shooting is what I think he's going to bring to Charlotte. The Hornets are a bottom 10 team in three-point shooting basically every year for the last 4 or 5 years. They can't make open shots. They suck at shooting. They need to get way better at shooting. They need to go find better shooters. Brandon Miller is a good shooter. I think adding Grant Williams at the deadline was a guy who can hit the threes from the corners and stuff like that. So that's what I basically expect them to do this offseason. Use whatever they can to make moves to basically just become a better shooting team. I think that's probably where you start because Budenholzer was all about three-point shooting. He was very big on the math. He was very big on space on the floor. Obviously, Joe Mazzulla talks about it all the time too. You need to find shooting if you're Charlotte. They're going to have a bunch of cap space. I think you're going to see any shooters that are out there. It would not surprise me if they went out and tried to overpay them. I do not think that they're a Klay Thompson landing spot. Clay's not going to Charlotte. But can you go find those guys? Can you go find an elite shooter, whether it's in free agency or a trade? Even if it's an overpaid shooter, can you do the OKC thing where you say, okay, we'll take your overpaid player as long as he shoots 38% from three-point range. Throw us a draft pick. We'll call it good. Whatever. Like, that's what they got to go out and do.
Yeah, $40 million or so in expected cap space, which is something. I mean, Buddy Hield would be a name that I think could be interesting. Gary Trent Jr., if you wanted like a little more of a semblance of a two-way guy. That's the other part of this, too, is that like I think if you think about Bud and you think about Mazzulla and you think about what made those teams successful, and Wes, I think, frankly, what made the Hornets successful under James Borrego with LaMelo was that team had a two-way identity. As much as the offense really worked, they at least tried hard on defense and at least had some competitiveness. That also just hasn't really been there. There's been nothing resembling anything really positive there of late. You kind of got to get back to that as well. I think they have to, there's going to be, this is, I think, again, going to take some time, but I think finding pieces who you can at least have some semblance of a two-way identity as well is going to be part of that. It's like the guys Bud wanted to play during the Milwaukee time, the Atlanta time, we're not just like, essentially like Kyle Korver. We're not specialists, and specialists don't exist in the NBA now. Those guys are out of the league, right?
It's hard,
like,
right?
Even like a Sam Hauser can hold up on defense, but even if his skill is one thing,
then he comes off the bench.
Right, he comes off the bench, and he plays 12 minutes, and maybe he doesn't play in the finals. But
that's the other thing too is if you're Charlotte, you want the three-point shooting part of it. You need to get better as a shooting team because you just in general. It's really hard to be successful in the NBA if you're a bad three-point shooting team. And sort of the second sort of phase of the build is making sure that your three-point shooters can stay on the floor the way that the Celtics have figured out lately, right? Like they said, okay, we've got three-point shooters. We've got guys who we trust to make open jumpers like Drew Holiday and Derek White, but they're also awesome defensively. Our two wings, Tatum and Brown. awesome defensively, have really worked on their three-point shots throughout their careers. We went out and gotten a 5-out center with Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford. But it takes a while, right? You have to kind of go through the Marcus Smarts, who are a little bit more of a one-way player, or the other centers that you sort of cycled through, and all these other guys that you sort of cycled through. It takes a while. The Hornets also have the 6th pick in the draft. So, I think a guy like Dalton Knecht out of Tennessee, great shooter, a little bit better defensively, depending on what scout you listen to, than maybe he gets credit for. But I even think a guy like Cody Williams out of Colorado can make sense for them. Stephon Castle out of UConn, perhaps. Guys who can be a little bit of a two-way presence, who can get better as a three-point shooter, make a lot of sense, I think, for the Hornets. And then you surround those guys with as much shooting as you possibly can. But the other thing with Charles Lee, he's going to have to figure out a way to coach up LaMelo. If LaMelo's he needs to play. He's got the size. He's got everything you would possibly want out of that position.
The
size, be a two-way player.
The size thing with him is the strength thing, because he's never been strong enough or even like husky enough. Like Luka's at least like got like a frame on him where it's like, even if he isn't always in shape or like whatever, he at least has like a body where you can't really bully him. You can bully LaMelo on top of the effort not being there. And again, like you can find quotes from a Slam profile, from a lot of other stuff of that time, where he clearly just did not like how James Borrego like put reins on him. And frankly, like friction between obviously these things can run their course, but if NBA history, Wes, is littered with coaches and their stars, like friction is how you get to greatness. Like there's friction between Ty Lue and LeBron. There's friction between Spo and Jimmy Butler. Go back to the 80s. There's friction between Kareem and Magic and Pat Riley. Like this is how this works. Like, and to just like bristle at the one coach who
haven't done
a winning record. Have you done anything? Haven't done a single thing of have success. That to me is like the biggest reason why I'm probably a skeptic, on top of the injury stuff. That scares me. And that how that works, how the Charles Lee LaMelo thing works. And look, we have not heard from Charles Lee because he is finishing his duties with Boston. But to me, the number one question that I want to hear him talk about aside from, I think more than Brandon Miller, more than anything else, is how do you figure out getting the most out of LaMelo Ball going forward? That's the biggest question.
He's a transcendent talent if he can engage it. It's a very similar situation to what's happening to Trae Young in Atlanta, right? Nobody doubts the talent, the passing acumen, the vision, the basketball feel, elite, top 1%, elite stuff. But do they want to be coached? And do they want to be coached hard? And are they willing to be held accountable? And are they willing to sacrifice certain things for the betterment of the team and all these things? And when they haven't proven that their way is a path to success in the NBA, and I think we know it's not. The difference between Charlotte and Atlanta is I kind of think Brandon Miller's the guy. I'm building around Brandon Miller. I'm not building around LaMelo Ball.
So
my challenge to him is, do you want to be a part of this or not? Because Brandon Miller's going to be the better player.
I don't think they would do this. Like Zach Lowe and Jonathan Gavoni talked about this on the Low Post. But like, it sort of doesn't seem like they would do this. But like, I would really be like, what could I get for? I would just want to know, like, what could I get for LaMelo? I really would want to know, like, what would a team give up for LaMelo, considering how much money he's making, what he has and has not done as a pro.
The injury concerns.
It would be interesting. Injury concerns, like who would take the risk? Like what?
I don't even know what team is out there that could use a LaMelo Ball. I think maybe
Utah
could. Yeah.
Okay. Look at us, Wes.
All right. Let's make a
like
Let's put a fake Utah Jazz trade. We'll do this one for TikTok, all right? So we got the Hornets and the Jazz. All right, LaMelo Ball, he's making $35 million a year on this new extension that kicks in. You can get the John Collins contract and Sexton, or maybe
how many? Three firsts, 2 firsts, three.
Three seems like a lot.
3, one's like got some Fugazi protections on it that turns into like 2 seconds, but you can say you got 3 firsts.
Something like that makes sense. And you can go ahead, get a guard who can get downhill and do some stuff for you and Colin Sexton. You get another big, so you get a little bit more depth there with John Collins, who's on a decent contract now. It's not as bad as it used to look because it's only got 2 more years left. They got guys, but yeah, it would be the picks. And if you're the Jazz, you've got LaMelo Ball, you've got Keontae George, you got Larry Markkinen. This is a team that wants to make a swing, and LaMelo actually does fit a lot of what Hardy is looking for in terms of everybody can dribble, pass, shoot, everybody's moving all the time kind of stuff. I don't know. Could be interesting. I don't know that anybody's going to want to take on LaMelo at 5 years left, knowing the injury history. I think somebody's going to say, okay, what does he look like? Can he get healthy? And then maybe teams, if he can look good for the first half of this season or all season, maybe it's something that teams warm up to at the deadline or next summer. But it would not shock me if they seriously tried exploring LaMelo. Also, his value is really low too, so maybe it's not prudent to do this now. Like, what are you rushing for if you're the Hornets? You're not going to be good now.
Yeah, and like they shouldn't be rushing anything. Even with this draft, it's like if you told me they took Klingon at 6, and we're like, yeah, like we're not super sold on Williams, and like we just think Klingon's the best guy in a weird draft, I'd be like, sure, that's great. I'm cool with that. I think Klingon's going to be a rock solid pro, and I would buy that. Right? You could convince me of anything.
If I'm Charlotte, here's what I do. Not that they're asking me. I like the coaching hire. I think Charles Lee is a good hire. Mm-hmm. You've got your first two-way wing, your number 1 guy perhaps, and Brandon Miller. I would try to use the 6th pick to go get the other guy. If it's Cody Williams, if it's Ron Holland, do your work, do the scouting, go get that guy. And
lottery ticket.
Yep. And then hopefully, if you're lucky, this ends up being your version of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And then you go from there, and I still like Mark Williams. Whatever, doesn't really matter. You see if that pans out. You see if the LaMelo Ball thing can work. If not, you start looking for him. But then I just spend all of my money on shooting. I just do it all on shooting, and I just say, okay, can we at least get a proof of concept this year of what our wings could look like with real shooting around them, and if Charles Lee is a real good coach, and if this was the right hire, and then you go from there. And then maybe you can end up trading these guys going forward and whatever like that. But I think you need a proof of concept year of we kind of just need to see like an outline of what it is that we want to do, and then we can kind of start filling in the holes after that.
Yeah, and look, and you have some money to spend this summer. You have some contracts you could flip. Like there's just not a lot of other guys on this roster that I'm super excited about. Yep. And look, it has not helped that they've missed over and over again on drafts the last couple of years. They missed on Boo Knight. They missed the Kai Jones thing. Yeah. They missed on they missed and missed. They need to draft better. New front office in place, new ownership in place, new coach in place. This feels like maybe the start of something better. One would hope.